You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work.
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. Baby, don't hurt me.
We asked our contributors to tell us about a movie they thought presented an ideal depiction of romance, and they answered. Join us for one heck of a wild ride we're calling
What is love?
Hi, and welcome back to the Signal Watch. Thank you so much for listening in. Today we continue on with our series discussing romance in film. And with me today is
Marshall Preddy.
And we are discussing
The Piano, Jane Campion's Piano, The Piano.
If you haven't been listening to this series, what the prompt was, or what I had asked our contributors to do, was to think of a movie that in some way epitomizes romance for them. Romance in cinema, or however they wanted to interpret that prompt. There are no hard and fast rules. Marshall will not be told he is wrong at any point. So, The Piano. I had not seen this movie since I saw it in the theater back during its initial release. I saw it with a buddy who talked me out of going to see RoboCop 3. And
That's a good choice.
We went to go see The Piano. And I think this is slightly better than RoboCop 3.
Slightly.
All things said. I think it won several Academy Awards.
Good.
I guess let's not beat around the bush. You know, you selected this for a reason. I was curious if you had kind of a thesis statement for why The Piano works for you.
Well, I mean, it works for me generally as a movie, first and foremost, because it is it's one of the first art house films I saw. Mm-hmm. Not the first, but it's one of the first art house movies I saw, and it's just it's a very sophisticated literary movie with a very highly developed visual vocabulary. It's got extraordinary music. Michael Nyman is the composer for the music. I mean, the movie's called The Piano, about a woman who literally expresses herself. She's mute, so she has no voice, but she expresses herself through her piano playing. She's a composer, and the music is very tightly wound into the story. So what makes it romantic is that it is very painterly in its images, and then it's got the music. It's communicating just on a number of different levels. The love triangle that is at the center of the story, a woman who has been, from all indications, she's been mute since she was 6, and we don't know why. She doesn't know why. She's somewhat of an unreliable narrator, and she's married off to her husband by her dad. She has a child with her, so she has a previous marriage. We never know what that was. We're told several stories about her old marriage. We never find out. And then so she comes to New Zealand from Scotland. She's Scottish. And there's a love triangle. There's her husband that she meets, and then a man who is basically their guide. He is a white man who has sort of gone native, living with the Maori there in New Zealand. And they both fall in love with her. And their different conceptions of love, and her driving and just force of will, which she wants, that's what makes it compelling to me, is these three very strong characters articulating what they want from very adult relationships. and how they go about that, how they conceive of romance, how they not romance, but how they conceive of this they need a match. Especially the two men want a match, and how do they go about it? How do they express their desire? And the whole movie is about that. The whole movie is about how we express love, how we express what we want out of not just a marriage, but sex, and very frank. And in terms of, we can get into that, but it is the first movie I saw that went into not just, hey, here's a sex scene because these people are naked, but here's a sex scene and look at how each of these people approaches physical intimacy and what they want out of it and what it means to them to be attracted to someone, what kind of physical touch they like. And it gets into that, and it's very and it gets into that in so many different ways that it's just compelling. And so I went back. I hadn't seen it in 25 years, and I watched it last night. We're just reliving it, taking notes. I'm still amazed, and now I even have a better grasp of the sophistication, the visual language of the movie, how the actors tell the story largely without their words, and how the music ties into it as well. So there's just it begins with that soundtrack, that very romantic, swelling soundtrack that for Michael Nyman was really a departure for him. But that music sold 3 million copies. That's how compelling it was. It's one of the biggest selling movie soundtracks of all time, primarily because of the song that serves as its thesis statement. The heart seeks pleasure first. That is a hit song from this movie. And it's a hit. It is a romantic, by romantic I mean big R, romantic sort of minimalist / classical music piece. Based on a Scottish folktale or Scottish folk song.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you meant about when, we saw this. I guess I was 18 or 19. You would have been about the same age. Right. So I was a freshman at UT at the time. And I was just kind of hitting that point where I was dropping my ego enough to admit I don't know if I entirely understand what I'm looking at.
Right.
You haven't exactly had a mature adult relationship at that point. But it was a movie that I wouldn't say... and I think people probably, after listening to me talk about superheroes and whatever, I don't just like genre movie. And it was from a period that I'm always going to hold up as, back in the good old days of, unfortunately the Weinstein's legacy is horrendous at this point, and a lot of stuff has come out about them as actual people. But at the time, Miramax had done this remarkable job of bringing a different kind of cinema to regular movie theaters. They were bringing in things like, Remains of the Day and things like that
Pulp Fiction.
Right. And it was, you look at this movie and it was Jane Campion who had some success in New Zealand and Australia with movies like An Angel at My Table. When do you see a movie in 2019 that was written, directed, and produced by the same person, let alone a woman? And whatever...
At the time, it was groundbreaking for being from a woman's perspective, for being directed by a woman, centering around a female character and exploring female desire, and that was all brand new, in American cinema, and it was a big deal because it was so well made, so well crafted, and it was such a forceful vision. Yeah, and it was rewarded for that. I think she won Best Director. Certainly, she won Best Director at Cannes. The movie won the top prize at Cannes, and both the actresses. We should mention this was Holly Hunter, who had been Holly Hunter had been before and was after this an amazing actress. And then Anna Paquin, it was her first role. Later went on to, what is the vampire show that she was in? True Blood?
She was in True Blood.
She was in True Blood, but she's fantastic in this and won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress at age 9 or whatever she was.
Yeah, which at the time I remember thinking was a bit of a stunt, but in rewatching the movie now, I mean, it's still a stunt, right?
It's like all of the Ricky Schroeder.
Yeah.
It takes advantage of a real precociousness that's there. She has chops. She's very skilled and works well in this movie. Is they take both a precocious child, but then her gifts work particularly well for the movie. It's almost like they wrote it for her.
Yeah. I mean, and it has a unique, because she is a single mother, the relationship she has with Anna Paquin in the film. It's also a maybe unromantic view or blunt edged view of trying to be a parent in that relationship. She's trying to have a sexual relationship and keep the kid out of the dang house.
That's right.
While she's going through all this, and of course the child reacts to all of this and reacts as a kid would.
The only other comp I can think of is Kramer versus Kramer, which is equally memorable in terms of a single parent trying to navigate not just being a parent, but also having sexual relationships and trying to meet a new person while having a kid. So I both of those are very formative for me, but it's almost like that disappears because this movie looks like it's one of those remains of the day period pieces, but the movie disturbs that right away. The moment it's not a hoop skirt drama. They literally make a tent out of the hoop skirt, and it's a striking visual image because it's not this mannered. It's not this drama of manners.
Right.
Very quickly, she washes up on shore she's being deposited there, and it's not like somebody's waiting there for her. She has to wait several days before her husband shows up with a team of Maori to retrieve her. So they're just out on the beach alone. After they arrive, they're dropped off by these rude Scotchmen, I should say, whatever. And they literally take her daughter's hoop skirt and make a tent out of it, a shelter, because they have no other shelter. All their belongings are there, looking like a Salvador Dali painting, strewn along the beach. And then they walk miles in the mud, and you can see them in mud up to their shins. So this movie just immediately disturbs hey, this is not a mannered period piece that you're getting into. And it does invite those comparisons. This is really a single parent drama who's trying to negotiate both her own wants and needs and those of her daughter.
Yeah. The two other major adult characters in the film are played by Sam Neill, who you probably remember from Jurassic Park as Dr. Grant, and the ubiquitous of the 90s Harvey Keitel. Keitel's got this interesting path. They all did at this point, partially because of the kind of cinema that was being made. Sam Neill, a couple of years before this, had done Until the End of the World as well, where I felt a little bad. He was this poor guy who just couldn't catch a romantic break in movies at this point. Keitel's an interesting choice for the temptation, I guess, on the other side of the marriage. Sam Neill plays the inexperienced, I would guess, kind of buttoned down guy that she's been betrothed to, having sight unseen. Right. And his first comment to her is, "You're much smaller than I thought you would be," or somewhere along those lines.
I thought you'd be big. I didn't think you'd be small.
Yeah. And Keitel does an accent actually pretty well, but he's also, I remember thinking his performance was a little mannered when I saw it in college, and now I'm like, no, this performance totally makes sense.
Very naturalistic.
Yeah.
And really, it's him, but it's not him. It's like I think it's one of his best performances for me. I can't even think of I can't. This is one of the few movies where he's asked to be basically a lead role. And in a lot of movies, I would say he's more, I guess Bad Lieutenant, which is one of his other famous roles from that era. But to play a romantic lead, he's probably not, and we've joked about this before the podcast, he's probably not who you would pick if you were exploring really the female gaze. Like, we're gonna, this is what a woman sees, what a woman desires, and he is the object of that desire. That's really not who you would pick, but I think that's part of what the movie's trying, that's part of the story that the movie's trying to tell, through both its visual vocabulary, it's a romantic soundtrack, but it's very minimalist. I mean, the guy is literally a foundational minimalist composer, and I think part of what the story that it's trying to say is that we, not just the characters, but all of us to some extent, and this is one of the big things that I took away from the movie, we have a small horizon. We really don't know that many people, and ultimately when we make romantic choices for ourselves, we're not choosing among that many possibilities. And that's especially true here. And one of the points the movie makes, they take her from Scotland halfway around the world so that she can be in a tiny village with 2 suitors, neither of whom we would think of as ideal partners for her. She herself has even more narrow possibilities, because she's a mute with the child. And this movie's set in 1852. Yeah. So it's not that common to be a woman who is still marriageable and have a child and have really a disability of some kind. But she does, and even if she's very pretty, she's very preternaturally gifted, but she's damaged goods in the context of this movie. And that's why her father marries her off to a man who also has no real choices. Yeah. He's surrounded by matronly sort of relatives and people in New Zealand. He needs a wife, and Keitel is another one who has gone native. He has adopted the ways of the Maori native to New Zealand, lives with them and is respected by them. And he's really got no way of finding a partner either. And so that's what I think the movie is exploring, is the way what does it mean to desire someone when your choices are already naturally quite thin? There's not a big dating pool. Right. And what does that mean, and what do we do as humans in that situation? I think a big part of the point Campion's making by choosing Keitel as the quote-unquote, as these 2 men as leading men, one of which is a domineering, abusive husband that she was arranged to marry, and the other one is a weirdo. Yeah, this is her choice, and Campion's making a point. A lot at the time that she filmed the movie. She was a woman filmmaker, so it came up a lot. Is this a feminist movie? What does this mean to be a feminist movie? She's portraying what it is really like in the 1850s to be a woman and to have choices made for you, and then to be able to, how do you build your world out of that from the confined spaces that you're put in? How do you make your desires known? How do you fight for what you want? And that is what Holly Hunter's character Ada does throughout the whole movie, is making her desire known, making her will felt, whether she's making it in writing or through her piano. It's the literal weight that she drags the movie is the piano, and that I think a lot of the criticism that this movie took at the time, it does have a rich visual symbology to it, is that it was too weighted in its symbols, too writerly, there were too many. It was hitting you over the head with its visual language.
It has too many notes.
Yes, but that turns out to be what is the core of what holds up to the movie and what you remember about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the will thing that you used that word a couple times, and I wanted to jump on that because that's right up through the finale of the film. It's her also fighting with her own will to some extent. She's willful to the point of maybe she's just been mute just to be willful this entire time. She says at the beginning, I don't know why I'm mute.
That's right.
There's no physical, affliction. And yeah, she's somewhat at war with herself throughout the entire film.
Yep.
One of the things that I had not remembered, of course it feels different in 2019 than it did in 1993 or 4, was that her first touch from Harvey Keitel's character is, now we would say it's sexual assault, right?
Right.
And he does back off, and from then on, they're blunt about what all of it is as a transaction.
It is a transactional relationship for her most prized possession.
Yeah. And I did like how she negotiated it down to just the black keys, but it would be so hard now to do that same scene and be as blunt about it, where that's something that I somewhat miss from that era of filmmaking, was this acceptance of, we're going to have some stuff that doesn't necessarily, it's a little gross, right? It's right. Our characters are imperfect, and some of this stuff is going to be rougher around the edges, where now people would all be a little bit up in arms that the main character had to, I'm doing this in air quotes, have this transaction.
To trade her body for her most prized possession, her piano, which is her voice.
Right.
And we talk about Weinstein, but that is at the center of this movie are the transactional relationships between the two men. Mm-hmm. I was reading reviews of this movie as I did my research and went back to it, and they were like, well, this can't be a feminist movie because this is really about her choosing between her two rapists. And that is that's a defensible way of looking at this movie. Mm-hmm. But when you read the movie, and I think Campion is explicit in this, and it's not just something that her and Keitel's character, Ada and Baines, really do. It's not one of those things where you invent a consensual relationship out of what has occurred. It began from the tight quarters, she has two choices. Mm-hmm. If she wants this part of her to be fulfilled, mm-hmm. She does get into a transactional relationship where she's trading the keys, but ultimately he gives her back the piano and says, this is making you a whore, and I don't want that. I want you to want me, really want me. And she does. She really feels that way, and I know I'm a dude saying that. That's one of the pitfalls of talking about this movie and saying, hey, this is romantic. Well, how romantic is it? She picks the lesser evil of her two rapists, and that's essentially what she does. But I think that's being too harsh on the movie, and I don't think it's giving Campion's narrative enough credit.
And I think it's also the oversimplification we do of both real humans and characters and stories, and the kinds of stories we're able to tell. If something hits up against a rubric, and we have to decide this is harmful because we don't necessarily agree with how this plugged into the rubric.
Well, it begins with her being married off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To a dude she's never met.
That ship has sailed in the first 20 seconds.
Right. This is 1852, and I think it's not crazy for this film to acknowledge the very real that women's bodies, sexuality, their beings were currency, and by extension, her piano. Her piano is traded for land. Mm-hmm. Keitel's character, and this is what I love about the movie, and in exploring desire and exploring what that thesis means when it says the heart seeks pleasure first. Right away, he makes he's really a stand-in for imperialism, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the subtext, is that he is the colonizer, and he right away shows up to, I'm going to collect my wife and I'm going to tell her how it's going to be. That's his model for manhood. Mm-hmm. Give me the cost-benefit analysis of all your belongings here on the beach, and I'll decide what we take back up. And he leaves her piano on the beach, which is her. Everything that she cares about is that piano, and she makes it abundantly clear on the beach, fighting for the piano, and she can't take it with her because of her new husband's decree. Keitel is also on the beach. He's leading the Maori. I mean, he sees her immediately, and he knows immediately the way they treat her. One of them says, well, this is how it's going to be. The other one says, what is important to this woman? Mm-hmm. And if that woman becomes important to me, how do I speak to her? Really, how do I love what she loves? Which I think becomes how they find common ground. He really buys the piano from him to save it for her. Really, I think that's basically what happens. He does use that as his leverage to begin a physical relationship with her. It is transactional. There's no sugarcoating that, but it's not unrequited.
Right.
I mean, she is. You feel her saying, the way the two men express their desire. He's, Baines or Alistair Stewart is Sam Neill's character. He's very repressed. He doesn't know how to explain to her or even ask for her. He's surprised that it even comes up as a question. He's just entitled to her is the way he begins, but he doesn't know how. Once he realizes and meets her and looks her in the eyes, he realizes he can't just take her, and he doesn't know how to ask for her love. But Baines knows how to do that directly and does, in very direct language, saying, I want to kiss you. Lift up your skirt. All of these that reaches her. She feels desired, and in turn desires him.
Yeah.
And that vocabulary, and it's all visual, and it's all by touch. To me, it was very powerful. The comparison. Every love triangle works like that, right? It's a comparison between the two, between all the actors.
And they do also try and give it a go. Partway through the movie, once she's somewhat found out, where she does try and
love him, right?
Yeah, and. But Sam Neill's character is Sam Neill's character. I also found it interesting, and I had completely forgotten, they have that kind of story within a story of they go to the play of Bluebeard, and Bluebeard murdering all of his wives kind of one by one, and kind of how the different characters are reacting to this, and not the least of which is the Maori, who are not used to dramatization like this.
Right.
And that's played for kind of this kind of cute moment in the movie.
The play within the play,
but the play within the play always informs more about the story than it's always supposed to drive something home there. So, and I welcome you. I'm not going to go through what the story of Bluebeard is. You can go Google that. It's a very old one. But I do think, to your point of her feeling desired in that way, and not from a I can use terms like creepy stalker, which are not really fair to Sam Neill's character, but him watching her,
or Harvey Keitel's, right?
Yeah, and kind of how they view her and how she wants to respond to that. If Keitel is direct with her, I mean, very direct.
Very direct.
Pulls the curtain back. There's no question.
I want to lie naked with you without. I want to lie with you without clothes on.
Yeah. And that speaks to whatever that will is that she's at odds with,
right?
That goes unspoken. One of the things they go back to a refrain from a poem in this, that it's also how the film finishes. She, even as she is being pulled free to be given possibly a life that she actually wants, she chooses to abandon the piano, but as she's doing,
or die with it,
and that's the decision she makes. The movie, I believe, says she decides in a moment of crisis, 40 feet down or whatever, she beats her own will, whatever that is, that's just fighting anyone who's trying to control her, or she perceives that way, and lives. But there's also a part of her that maybe she did kill that is down there. But I also think that there's other interpretations of that ending.
It's our friend Laura is very fond of this person died and it's really all a fantasy, and this ending lends itself to that. Did she really just die in the boat, and this is all and the rest of her life is just a fantasy or a figment, a possibility that isn't realized, because part of Campion lingers on that ghost underneath the water, weighted down by the piano, the dead figure, and ends with a poem about silence. And the whole movie talks about silence as being powerful and having weight, and it ends with a poem about silence and death. So we don't really know, because she's set up at the very beginning as an unreliable narrator. The very first image of the movie, you have what is an incomplete picture. It becomes a visual motif throughout the film of her looking through her fingers and only seeing part of the world. That is echoed throughout the movie through keyhole imagery, whether it's when they first are married and they take the photograph for appearances. They're all out in the rain, and it's like, and they're all in the mud and the rain, but they're taking this very proper 19th century photograph in their finest clothes that are really just smocks that are ripped off later. And you see the photographer and Mr. Stewart looking through the keyhole to see what the picture will look like. Later, Stewart is voyeuristically watching as she and Keitel make love, and actually so is her daughter. They both have moments where they view Baines and Ada making love, and they each take something away from that. There's I don't know the number of movies in 1993 that had a dude like orally pleasuring a woman on screen, but that is the very first time I had ever seen that. And at the moment that Keitel is doing that, and is very clearly doing that, Neil's character, her husband, is looking through a slat in the wooden house, and a dog is licking his hand. It's just it's one of the things that I think critics of this movie point to in terms of the overwrought symbolism. But this movie is very clearly trying to make its point visually and not through dialogue. Yeah. And it's a powerful moment. And he's later under the floorboards looking up at her. So just throughout the movie, and again, that's the sort of imperfect information, not a lot of choices, not a lot of visual information. We are making choices and living life in the cave. Not out here under the sun, but we're with imperfect information. We're not seeing everything. We're not seeing the whole picture. And I think that's one of the things the unreliable narrator. We were both English literature veterans. The unreliable narrator is one of the first tropes you learn when you start deconstructing literature, and that's here. She tells 3 different stories about how she doesn't marry her husband. And one of them, when she tells her daughter, she's like, "Tell me again the story about Father." And he was like, "How did her daughter asked, how did you speak to him?" He's like, "I didn't need to speak because I could lay out my thoughts on like paper in his mind." Sam Neill's character Alistair Stewart later echoes that. When he tells Baines that he's releasing her. He's like, "I heard her will. I heard her tell me what she wanted. She wants you to rescue her." And she didn't say that with her words, but I could hear her voice in my mind. And what she says to her daughter is, why didn't you marry my dad? And she says, "Because he got frightened and scared of my voice." Her mind's voice that he could hear. And one of the interesting things and again, this goes back to what desire really is. She can't do that with Keitel's character. She can't do that with Baines. She's trying to tell him what she wants, and he's not hearing it. And because he can only tell her directly, and he can only feel directly what she wants. He's not weak-minded or frightened of her, but she can't lay out her thoughts like on paper in his mind either. And that famous moment, or not famous, but the big moment where he declares his love for her and she does the same, essentially, he thinks up to the moment when she begins to beat him and finally kisses him that she doesn't love him. Yeah. Because he can't hear her thoughts like that, and she can't do that to him. They have to have a more direct language between them. And in a nutshell, that's why I love this movie, is because it is negotiating, well, what is the language of love? What does it mean to desire someone? How do we tell people that we desire someone? When her husband is lying on his back and she's trying to communicate to him, like, "I'll give this a go," physical desire. He thinks she's the object of his desire, and her husband recoils from her desire. Because that's not a thing. Yeah. Women don't express physical desire that's not what women do in 1852. Right. But it's very pointedly what she's doing, and this whole movie is about that.
I'm going all the way back to like high school English, but they had us read like Tess the D'Urbervilles, and we read The Awakening, and back in high school, and one of the things that I always found frustrating was they would do these stories of women trying to, struggle through as a woman, and it was a woman's story, but it always ended in like the awakening ends with her walking into the sea, and that's she doesn't walk back out of the sea. I'll put it that way. Tess at the D'Urbervilles, I can't remember how Tess dies badly, but she does.
Ophelia and Hamlet.
Yeah, and that's part of why I want to grab on to that final scene of it not being a fantasy, that the fantasy is actually that she died under the sea. But I also, and for whatever reason, the way this is structured, accept both endings as being perfectly fine for this particular character, because I felt like this character she was a victim, certainly, but there was not kind of a let's fetishize her victimization and make that the point of this, that she is a stronger character, and how that's reflected then back through her intensely willful daughter is anyway. I do think it has more of a, maybe it's not a perfectly refined feminist message, but there is a strong character in there to grab onto, and interesting to see how it reflects off the two male characters. We haven't talked much about the Maori in this movie, and one of the things that really struck me was how many Maori characters there actually were in this movie.
Mm-hmm. And Campion is from New Zealand,
right?
So,
and it's the relationship there is interesting. I was talking to Laura a little bit about the fact we're going to talk about this movie, and she was wondering about kind of how do you see this as kind of colonialist depiction. It's like, well, there's no getting around that's what it is,
right? But one of the subplots, right, is that Neil is already buying 80 acres. He bought 80 acres of Baines's land with the piano, and he's very concerned all the way, but he's also trying to buy their land, and it is sacred burial land for them that they're not interested in selling. And they make this clear. It's really an old plot line. It's like, we're trying to swindle these natives out of their land. He's literally trying to do that. He is literally a colonizer trying to buy their land from them. And at one point he says, well, do they even know it's theirs? They don't cultivate it. They don't do anything with it. It just has this vague religious and cultural significance. And that story is the same as his story with Ada. Mm-hmm. He's trying to take what he doesn't understand, and it's entirely that story. He has no clue what he's trying to do. He's trying to grapple with the will of someone or something that he doesn't see as his equals. He doesn't see the Maori as his equals. Why is he having to negotiate with them? Why is this an ongoing thing with them? He should just be able to buy their land for trinkets and that's it. But they don't treat it like that. They take his buttons that he's trying to buy with land and they run off with them laughing at him. He is a buffoon to them.
Yeah.
And but the same thing, Campion, again, this is one of the heavy-handed criticisms, one of the criticisms I see in criticisms of this movie is that she's making a very explicit link between his treatment of the natives and his treatment of Ada. These are just things to which I'm entitled. Mm-hmm. And why am I having such trouble as a white man getting them? But they push back. And that's one of the themes of the movie. And you see this, and it gets to the land, too. He's engaged in not just a struggle with the Maori, not just a struggle with Ada, but a struggle with the land itself. And you see this in the way that the land sinks under your foot. There's mud everywhere, and you have to lay out these boards and walk on it. Otherwise, it will just swallow your leg, and that's everywhere you go. At one point, he's trying to literally rape Ada, and he's doing it in the forest in full vision of the Maori, or they're not far away. And I think the whole idea of I am trying to rape her in the woods is a very explicit visual image. That this is when we talk about rape of the land and destruction of native cultures. that is a real thing. It is against their will, and it is a taking of who they are. And that's exactly what he's doing to Ada, and Campion makes that explicit.
There's, in addition to the kind of three main characters, there's also the kind of the mother and the daughter team who are running around, and
the aunts. I think they're aunts and their niece.
I guess.
They're stewards. Yeah. I think they are. They're stewards. They're stewards' aunt and niece.
And we get kind of this idea of the culture, that he's used to, where he came from, and women who've kind of accepted those roles, and what's more on the outside there. And one of the you talked about kind of the music that she's playing, and one of the things that I had kind of clued into early on in the film is like, well, this doesn't sound anything like music from 1852, but they may actually make a point of that, and they discuss it in the film.
They do. There's at one point in the film where she's talking about the music that she plays, because there's a moment where she gets the piano back from Baines and plays it in the drawing room of Stewart's house, and I think I have it here where she describes it. She's a strange player, like a mood that passes into you. Now your playing is plain and true, and that is what I like. But to have it sound creepy, no. It's like this. It's they're stating explicitly what. And by the way, this conversation occurs while they're holding up sheets, and the matronly aunt is like pooping on the ground outside. Again, Campion is like, this is subverting the period piece. Yeah. Like, hey, people have to poop, and like outside a lot of the times here, and there's no outhouse, and there's no like, this is it's like Tarantino's old thing about how gangsters have kitchens. Campion's taking that period piece and sort of extending it here. The conversations they have while they're pooping is music criticism. And,
higher.
Yeah, exactly. Higher, lift the sheet. I don't want anyone to see me, because they're in the middle of nowhere, and she has her Maori helpers there. But that's a big moment where she talks about the creepy, the way the music affects you. It's like it's this impressionistic. Creepy is actually a good word for it. It gets into your skin. The way she says it's like a mood that passes into you. Something possesses you. It isn't this mannered drawing room, classical. It's not Bach. It's something else, and it's deeply affecting even to them. But to them, it's spooky. It isn't pretty, and that aligns with their view of her. She's not. She's pretty, but she's weird. She can't speak. I think the other thing we have to highlight here is shortly thereafter, once he discovers her husband discovers her adultery fairly early on, and he's cuckolded, but to him it's also a turn on for him. He's looking at them and trying to figure out, well, how can I do that? How can I become her lover? How can I gain her love? And the rest of the part of the movie, when he boards her in, he says, that's not the way you do it. You put the board on the outside. It's a visual metaphor, again, a very heavy-handed metaphor for his own repression. I'm putting you in and I'm not letting you out, nor is he letting his own feelings out. He can't express desire, even because he feels entitled to it. But once he finds out, once she swears she will not visit him, but she engraves she takes a key out of the piano and says, George, you have my heart, to Baines, and asks her daughter to go give it to him. But her daughter, and again, this is very visual, she starts to go down that road, but changes her mind and goes down a different road to tell Alistair that she did not want to deliver this message. And this happens all the time when you see these single parent movies. This is like where it feels like another time. She's a single parent. The kid has her own ideas about what she wants and what's right, and she has a very black and white sense of morality. She betrays her mother because her mother has relied on her to carry out this deception. Kids are poor vehicles for deception. So she goes and she hands the message meant for George to Alistair, and Alistair, of course, becomes enraged. And he reenacts the movie within the movie, takes the axe and drags her outside again with the very naturalistic image. One of the things I'll never forget about this movie is he is dragging her out to chop her finger off on a stump and pulling against her. She looks like she's sideways in a hurricane, holding on for dear life, but he drags her over there and chops her finger off. And it's one of the most visually arresting things you will see is the way she reacts to that.
Yeah.
She gets up, her face just goes blank. And this is probably why she won Best Actress. Her reaction to this, she doesn't die, she doesn't cry, she doesn't do anything but go into very real shock. And you see her fall into that mud of being defeated and shocked and horrified by what he did to her in the mud, and can't hold herself up. She collapses. It's horrifying because of the violence, and later he is like a typical abuser, saying, "Oh, I didn't want to hurt you. I love you. I just clipped your wing." But he is reacting violently against her will, and that's the whole movie. Is how these two men react to her will, and what they do about it. Eventually, he says he's got Baines at gunpoint. And he gives her back. He says, she's not meant for me. She wants you. She wants you to rescue her from here, and I think that's what I want too.
Yeah, I haven't seen that much more stuff that Campion did after this film.
And I haven't either, I should say.
And it makes me want to go and give more of her stuff a shot. I did see Angel at My Table, I think I said at the beginning of this podcast, when it was re-released in theaters at around this time. And was not ready at all for that movie. And so I'd like to give that one a shot again. I think it's actually coming out on Blu-ray right now. But yeah, it held up so well. If it's been a while for you, like it had been for us, give it a shot. It's streaming on Amazon. That's where I watched it. It's pretty readily available out there. So
yeah, it's a wonderful film. I'm glad I got to talk with you about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing.
Thank you.
And
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, we'll be back. We'll do hopefully another one or two of these, and explore more of what is love.
Baby, don't hurt me no more.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.